All right, I think we're going. I think we're live. Thank you, everybody who's here today, who's watching. We have basically what I'm trying to do each day is go through a nice little presentation showing some examples of IoT in various sectors. And today we've got a nice little talk on basically IoT examples in the food, security, and agriculture space. We had a conference back in January, an actual physical conference called AgFuse, agfuse.io. You can go and check out all of the information by going to agfuse.io. And you can also pull up the presentations by going to kconfs.conference.com, which I've talked about a lot on this site. Or if you're on IoT Fuse, just go up to the top and go click under materials, about, and then materials, and that should send you to all the different presentations. But what I wanted to do today is basically just go over 3 examples from the agriculture and basically IoT food safety space. Just some things that I thought were very interesting and that had some interesting feedback from the people who attended. It's a pretty simple overview, so let's just get started. So let me share my screen here. All right, and I think from what I remember, I can actually do a full screen. Let's see here, view, present. There we go. Okay, so again, you can go to agfuse.io to see more examples and to look at the materials and presentations where I had found all of these presentation slides. So the first thing I think we should talk about, because the world is changing, we need to be responsive and understand what's going on in the world and sort of talk about how, how does this all fit into reality. So I think one really interesting presentation was from Ed Ussett, who is a grain expert at the University of Minnesota, and he was so kind as to come and give a presentation about U.S. grain usage. Grain includes corn, hay, oats, and wheat, I think. I might be missing something, but the majority of all crops in the U.S. is corn, from my understanding, and wheat and hay. And I guess hay is mostly used for feed, but he gave an interesting, this is just one slide of his, which I encourage you to go check out his entire presentation at kconfs.conference.com, just sort of giving an update on what happened in 2019. And this was one of the slides talking about how is corn used. And what was interesting is that a lot of it is ethanol. So a lot of his presentation went into the export and trade war between China and the US. I think we're kind of beyond that now, and we've started to get into the pandemic, the age of the pandemic, rather than the age of the trade war. There may be other trade wars that happen as a result of this pandemic, but I think what's interesting and quite poignant right now is if you go and look at gas prices right now, they're below $2, at least in Minnesota. I've even seen gas prices in the $1.70 range, which with inflation, I have no idea. I think that's the cheapest gas has ever been in my entire lifetime of driving, maybe for others as well. But I think, what's important to note here is that because prices for fuel have gone down, the price of ethanol and the price of corn is going to go down, which it's already gone down because of the trade war. So if you have been going to the grocery store and thinking, wow, people are eating a lot of food, these grocery stores are going to make a killing, that doesn't necessarily translate to farmers making a killing. There might be certain kinds of farmers that might, if the food demand changes and moves up, or if grocery stores are able to command higher prices, different prices on the retail side. But as far as corn, which is the majority of what's used, at least in Minnesota and grown in Minnesota, I'm speculating that they're going to actually be hurting, because a lot of it goes to ethanol. Now that being said, their fuel prices, their fuel cost is going to go down. So who knows? But we just know that on the top line side, they're going to be in trouble. So with that context, let's look at some examples. So one super interesting example was this device from Apario IoT. It's essentially a gateway with CAN bus capability. So you have a couple different CAN buses and different plugins that are standardized for the agricultural industry. You have a lot of large equipment that's, by my understanding, usually standardized against how trucking is done, and large equipment, mining equipment, they all use this protocol called CAN bus. They also have digital I/O ports, RS-232 serial, and some Wi-Fi ports. But what does it really do? What's on the inside of this thing? Well, it's essentially a very ruggedized, it's a very, very ruggedized IoT device for agricultural usage that has smart capability inside of it, so that you can hook up off-the-shelf cameras and different kinds of cameras and use it to detect and create alarms for different kinds of grain. So this is really just sort of the spec sheet on what that, it's basically a computer, and this is basically the spec sheet for the computer, but it's a computer designed for a special application to be out in the field and to work with communication protocols that are coming of age, and being able to work with the Cat1 and Cat M1 and other communication protocols that are much more deep penetrating and smaller, lower bandwidth, so they go farther. They might have less data, and look at that as a separate communication, low power, wide area, cellular network connectivity. Look at that separately from the kind of regular higher power 5G. So they basically are, this device kind of plays both of those spectrums, by my understanding. You call the higher spectrum the broadband, the narrow spectrum the narrowband. My understanding is they're playing off of both to maintain connectivity as an IoT device, and then connecting up to cameras and giving all sorts of alerts based upon what the grain looks like. So you've got just sort of a regular camera, and you're pointing it at the grain in process, so in the actual grain device. And then you're using neural networks on that machine, on that computer, to sort of detect what is happening in terms of if there's something going wrong. It will identify that. Is there the wrong kind of grain that's getting meshed in with the wrong kind of grain mixed with the wrong kind of grain? So you're mixing oats and corn, or is there some other sort of flaw? So that was one very interesting example at AgFuse, and you can learn more about what they have at apario.com/Apario IoT. Then we had a talk on, and there were a lot of speakers. There's more than just 3 speakers, but I'm just showing 3 here. We had a talk from Scott Neiman from Land O'Lakes, who more talked about agricultural data standardization through a standards body called Ag Gateway. So a lot of the problem in the agricultural space, where margins are thin, has to do with making sure the data is going to be regularized such that you can communicate back and forth between the retailers or the grocery stores, if it's food, and the grain elevators or storage spaces and the growers, and you can kind of trace what's going on. And so if you do have a future where you've got all sorts of Internet of Things devices over here and devices along the way and back at the grower, are they all going to be speaking the same language? Or is this guy going to have to do so much work that he could never understand what's going on because it's just too expensive on the data side? So that's what Ag Gateway is about. So it's very much an IoT, part of the IoT spectrum, because you are recognizing that there are devices out there, and you're trying to make sure that they can all speak the same language and talk to each other, so that it's not an impossible problem to solve. And so one of the examples he gave was a crop protection work record. So maybe you're spraying a certain amount of pesticide on a field, but you don't want it to go above a certain level because it's going to affect these retailers, right? You don't want food that's completely full of pesticides if it's not completely organic. So what is happening right now is you have user-defined product names, and you have something like Tank 1. So this guy needs to sort out what Tank 1 is for all of these different growers. Well, if you had a standardized product name and you're able to communicate, well, what does 0 mean and why, and what is it? It's essentially similar to a schema, having a standardized schema like GeoJSON. If you're familiar with JSON at all, there's a form of JSON called GeoJSON where you can hold geo data from a GPS or GLONASS system, and you can populate a map using that kind of standardized, regularized data. So that's a very important part of IoT, is just recognizing we're going to have all these devices and sensors out there, or just smart equipment. How are you going to communicate that back and forth through the supply chain? That's always an important part of IoT, is understanding the supply chain is extensive. Another really cool example at AgFuse was this company, Imago AI. This is a company based out of India, and they have business development gentleman, Joe Morris, based in Minnesota here. And essentially what they do is they use kind of similar to the Appario AI example here, rather than using light to sort of bounce off seeds and make sure you're not mixing the right seed with the wrong seed, they are using hyperspectral industrialized cameras, also off-the-shelf cameras, and they are using GPU-based processors on site. This is not really something that's designed to ride along on a machine. It's more something that goes in a factory, and they're looking at things like lettuce, things like tomatoes, and sort of using hyperspectral lighting rather than optical lighting to look for things like bugs and bacteria. I would doubt that they can detect something like a virus. I would doubt that they can actually detect COVID-19, but food safety is an issue, and who knows, maybe there's something that they could tell us further in this kind of new world we're in. But I know that they seem to be specializing in the same sort of optical, beyond optical detection. Hyperspectral means you're looking at infrared and ultraviolet. So hyperspectral is Roy G. Biv, the kind of light optical. If you're talking about hyper, you're extending that out and using if you use ultraviolet light and you look at organic material, you can get a different perspective on what's going on. It's kind of like using a black light to find if there's, at a crime scene, to look at what's going on there. You can look at bacteria in different ways. So here's just sort of an illustration. It's looks like it's an inline camera that detects contaminants as small as 0.5 millimeters. So obviously virus is going to be much smaller than that, and certain bacteria is going to be a lot larger than that. That's 500 microns. But if you have a group of something, or if you have bugs, you can detect that. And it looks like it can detect, obviously multiple foreign objects along the way. It's going to detect and classify on a line, on a manufacturing line. So again, company from India, obviously I used to live in India. Food safety is definitely a concern there, and they eat a lot more food than we do because they've got a lot more people. So there's always a need to make that more efficient, more effective. And so this seems like a technology that could be interesting to try to apply into the US market as well. India is a very agricultural country. So you can check out more information by going to Imago AI. or imagoai.com. They have a lot of other interesting information on there. Or look up Joe Morris, who gave the presentation. And you can check out more examples of what other talks were given at agfuse.io by going to kconf.conference.com, or just go to any of our websites, go under About and go to Materials to look at some of the previous materials that we've shared. And yeah, so glad I got to talk about agricultural examples. Hopefully I'm drawing enough of a parallel between what's going on to make it interesting and not be completely tone deaf. But at the same time, just interesting to know that there are people thinking about our food supply chain, thinking about how to move things forward. Even through all of this, there's people going in, well, they're not going into work, but they're going into their home office every day thinking, how do we keep these essential services moving forward, and how do we improve and maintain safety as we do so. So hope this was interesting to watch. Thanks for watching.